On August 9th, 2013, at 12:38 a.m., Brandon Lawson called 911 from a highway in rural Texas. He stayed on the line, he gave his location, he described what was happening, and then he was gone. This is not a case where someone vanished without warning. This is a case where every system that should have prevented a disappearance was active, and it didn't matter. Brandon Lawson was 31 years old. He worked in the oil fields near San Angelo, Texas. He lived with his girlfriend Ledessa and their 4 children. On the night of August 8th, he left the house after an argument. He told Ledessa he was going to his father's place in Crowley, about 4 hours northeast. It was late. He'd been drinking earlier in the evening, but he got in his truck and drove. At some point on Highway 277, his truck ran out of gas. He pulled over near the town of Bronte between San Angelo and Abilene. The highway was empty, no street lights, no houses nearby, just flat land and darkness. Brandon called his brother, Kyle. Kyle lived about 30 minutes away. Brandon told him he'd run out of gas and needed help. Kyle said he had come. That call ended around 12:30 a.m. 8 minutes later, Brandon called 911. The call lasts less than a minute. Brandon's voice is hard to understand. The audio quality is poor. There's wind, there's background noise, but certain phrases come through. He says he's in a field. He says he needs the cops. He mentions someone else. He says he's not talking to them, or he is talking to them. The words overlap. The dispatcher asks for his location. He gives a mile marker. Then the call ends. This is where it should have ended. Brandon called for help. He gave a location. His brother was already on the way. Law enforcement was notified. All the pieces were in place. But when Kyle arrived at the mile marker 13 minutes later, Brandon was gone. Inside, the phone was gone. There was no sign of Brandon. Kyle searched the area on foot. He called Brandon's phone. No answer. He walked the ditches along the highway. He drove up and down the road. He saw no one. He tried calling again. Still, nothing. At 1:19 a.m., Kyle called the police himself. He told them his brother had called 911 and then disappeared. A deputy was dispatched, but when the deputy arrived, he found the truck, spoke briefly with Kyle, and left. No search was initiated that night. Brandon was an adult. His truck hadn't been in an accident. There was no immediate evidence of a crime. The deputy later said he assumed Brandon had walked off or gotten a ride. The assumption was that he'd turn up. He didn't. The next morning, Ledessa started calling. She hadn't heard from Brandon. She reached out to Kyle. That's when she learned what had happened. She contacted the sheriff's office. She told them Brandon was missing. She told them about the 911 call. She told them he wouldn't just leave. The department opened a missing person case. By then, it had been over 12 hours. The scene had not been secured. No evidence had been collected. No canine units had been brought in during the window when a scent trail might still have been strong. The initial response was not treated as an emergency. This is where assumptions begin. When someone leaves after an argument, the assumption is they'll come back. When a truck is found on the side of the road with no damage, the assumption is the person walked away on purpose. When an adult man goes missing in the middle of the night, the assumption is that he made a choice. But the 911 call doesn't match those assumptions. Brandon wasn't calm. He wasn't casual. He called for help. and then he was gone. 3 days later, a volunteer search was organized. Friends, family, and locals walked the area around the mile marker. They covered the fields. They checked the brush. A canine unit was finally brought in. The dogs picked up Brandon's scent near the truck. They followed it south into a field on the opposite side of the highway. The trail led several hundred yards away from the road, and then it stopped. The dogs lost the scent, not gradually, abruptly, as if Brandon had simply ceased to exist at that point. The handlers tried again. Same result. The trail ended in the middle of open land. No water, no road, no explanation. The 911 call was released to the family a few weeks later. Ledessa and Kyle listened to it over and over. They tried to decipher the words. They tried to understand what Brandon was describing. The audio is distorted. His speech is rapid, but certain phrases repeat. He mentions pushing someone into a ditch, or someone pushed him. He talks about a truck. He says he's in a field. He uses the word them. The call has been analyzed by audio specialists. It has been slowed down, cleaned up, transcribed dozens of different ways. No one agrees on what he's saying, but everyone agrees on one thing. Brandon was not alone. This is where the search begins to fracture. If Brandon was with someone, who were they? If he was in danger, why did he run away from the highway? If he was disoriented, why did he give a clear location? The pieces don't fit together. And the longer the case went unsolved, the more theories emerged. Some believed he encountered someone on the highway. Some believed he was running from someone he knew. Some believed he was confused, intoxicated, or experiencing a mental health crisis. Others pointed to the oil fields nearby, to transient workers, to the possibility of foul play. But none of these theories explain the scent trail. None explain why his phone was never found. None explain why no one saw anything. The highway wasn't completely empty that night. Kyle was driving toward Brandon at the same time the 911 call was made. Another driver, a truck driver passing through, later reported seeing two vehicles near the mile marker. One was Brandon's truck, the other was a dark SUV. The truck driver didn't stop. He didn't think anything of it, but that detail shifts the timeline. If there was another vehicle, someone else was there. If someone else was there, they saw what happened, and they never came forward. This is where it should have resolved. A second vehicle means a witness. A witness means information, but no one ever identified the SUV. No one ever reported seeing Brandon that night. The case went cold within months. Searches continued sporadically for years. Volunteers combed the area again and again. Nothing was found. No clothing, no phone, no remains. In 2015, human remains were discovered about 7 miles from where Brandon disappeared. The family believed it might be him. It took years for the remains to be tested. They weren't Brandon. In 2020, a landowner found a skull and some bones in a field even closer to the original location. Again, the family waited. Again, it wasn't him. As of now, there has been no confirmed trace of Brandon Lawson since the night he called 911. So, what makes this different? Most disappearances involve silence. Someone is last seen, and then there's nothing. No call, no message, no communication. The search begins in a vacuum. But Brandon called for help. He spoke to a dispatcher. He gave a location. His brother was minutes away. Law enforcement was notified. And still, he vanished. The systems that should have prevented this were active. The technology worked. The response happened. It just didn't matter. The question isn't what happened to Brandon Lawson. Not exactly. The question is what happened in the minutes after he left the highway. How does a scent trail lead hundreds of yards into an open field and then stop? How does someone who was on the phone giving directions vanish without leaving anything behind? No footprints, no phone, no signs of a struggle. Did he meet someone? Did he get into a vehicle? Did something force him away from the road? And if that happened, why was there nothing left to mark it? In February 2022, searchers discovered clothing and partial human remains near where Brandon's truck was abandoned. DNA testing later confirmed the remains belonged to Brandon Lawson, finally giving the family closure that he had died that night. Yet the exact circumstances of what happened in those final minutes remain a mystery.